Welcome to the Literacy Bug. It is with great pleasure that we introduce a new video presentation to the channel. In this case, these presentations will be looking at different activities that you can run to develop literacy skills, as well as teaching resources and everything you'd need to actually run the activity. So the first activity we'll be running through is Analyzing Spoken Words. Now, before I actually do any description or theory or anything about this activity, I'm just going to do a demonstration. So basically, Analyzing Spoken Words has the following workflow. Let's say I show the learner a picture that they know. In this case, a picture of rabbits. And the learner, regardless of age, will be able to recognize that from their oral language, even if they don't have any ability to read the word rabbits when they see that. So they have the word rabbits, and so we ask ourselves, okay, so first thing that I might do is I'm going to reach over here at a view and pull up this, and this is what I'm going to call a spoken word syllable. And I say, okay, what word is that? It's rabbits. Okay. Good. Let's say rabbits slowly. Rabbits. Oh, that's in two parts. That's what we call syllables. So I reach over here and I say some words that we can break up into more than one syllable. A syllable is a part of a word, a particular type of the part of the word. Rabbits. 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 Let me ask myself, what's the first sound in rabbits? The sound. Ah, okay, so it has. What sound after the So it has two sounds in that first part. Rabbits. Let's think of the second syllable. Rabbits. B. Okay, it starts with one sound. B. I. T. And because it's more than one, rabbits. It's. And that's an advanced skill, the ability to break up a syllable into each of its component sounds. And that's something that we expect learners to develop over time, to be able to sound out words, and it lays the foundation for the alphabetic principle. And that's what we call phonemic awareness. Now, phonemic awareness is also tied to phonemic knowledge. So if I go back to that first sound, the sound, it's not only a sound, but it's a sound that I know. So I'll represent that by that and that and it's the first sound, first A sound. So letter A, and most all vowels make at least two sounds. It's short sound, and the sound that says its name. So A, ra. And then the second one, B. So the B sound. And the I is the short sound of that letter I. Rabbit. Rabbits. As in snake. Rabbits. Now let's think, okay, how would I spell this? Well, I know. If I move over here, then I move everything up just slightly. Even just a little bit more. The sound is made most often by the letter R. ah. The ah sound is made 96% of the time, and I'll show you a resource later on which that comes to, by the letter A. Now the b sound, of course, is made by the letter B. But because the ah, I know that ah is the short sound, so after the short sound, in a multiple syllable word, you have the double B, rabbit. And these are all things that I know, but it's a learner will learn over time. Rabbits. And so on. And if I was imagining a young learner, if they are doing what I'd call invented spelling, they might not spell the word as I just spelt it here. They might have that double B spelt as a single B, and over time, they learn all the various ways of spelling and the spelling rules, but they first start out by sounding out words. So let's go back. I show the picture, in this case, picture of the rabbits. We say the word as a whole, rabbits. Say it slowly, rabbits. What's the first sound? Ah, it's, and so on. And so that's the logic behind the activity, analyzing spoken words. And obviously you wouldn't go through every step with learners of all ages. You're always being responsive to building upon the skills that the learner is tackling at that moment. So that's it in a nutshell. And in fact, you could take that, and that's all that you might need to know for this presentation. If I go further, so one of the areas of key focus in this activity is, first of all, vocabulary recognition about pictures, and you can organize a range of pictures. For this demonstration, I'll have a range of pictures of animals. So you can choose a particular semantic category, animals, fruits, vegetables, etc. And it starts off as from building off the oral language skills of the learner. And then phonological awareness, being able to identify syllables, for instance, beginning sound, etc. Phonemic awareness, which is understanding every single sound within a word. And auditory processing, so processing that certain sound, saying things slowly, saying things quickly, segmenting and blending of oral language. The further skills is further developing that phonemic knowledge. So not only knowing that there's sounds in a word, but they know that there's particular sounds, let's say in English, and that there's 44 or so sounds in English, and they develop this understanding over time. They start to learn sound letter correspondences. They learn to use invented spelling, to try out, to take risks, and to use their emerging knowledge of the alphabetic principle to have a go. And they use their problem-solving skills to be able to spell out words and to problem-solve words that they know in their oral language and that they could try it out in their written language. And then the extended is to then focus back on meaning. So semantic analysis, using those words in a sentence, therefore demonstrating grammatical competence, looking up, is this invented spelling the right spelling of the word? Am I spelling it correctly? And then ultimately focusing upon print recognition, so that when I pull up this piece of paper, and the learner sees those abstract symbols, they come to associate it with something less abstract, a word that they know about a thing that they know. And those are the skills being developed in the analyzing spoken word skill of this activity. So not very difficult, in fact very explicit about how we process sound and how we process words. And it's recognizing that this is a skill that can develop phonological and phonemic awareness, develop that alphabetic principle, letter sound knowledge, initially into phonics and spelling, as well as developing learners' phonology, their vocabulary, using those words in sentences, so therefore developing vocabulary and grammar, and so on. Now, in relation to how we focus on instruction, the key emphasis in this activity is phonological awareness and phonemic awareness, as well as vocabulary. And that's why those are in brighter red. But also phonics and listening comprehension, oral language, and to a lesser extent, print awareness, sight words, and writing and composition. Now, before I begin and go even further, what I'd like to point you to is on YouTube we have a further presentation called The Alphabetic Code, which talks in greater detail about, I think in many ways, a more theoretical approach to how a learner develops a knowledge of sound and letter patterns. But for today's purposes, we're focusing on something a lot more concrete, an activity that we can use around known vocabulary that can help learners start processing the sounds within words and being able to distinguish the sounds within words and associate those with letter patterns that they're familiar with. And so one thing to keep on emphasizing in this activity is that it's an encoding activity. It's not a reading activity. It is a encoding. So I am taking my oral language and figuring out how to represent that oral language in print. Okay, so let's get started with the bulk of this presentation. So the key emphasis within this activity follows upon with a comment that Mark Seidenberg makes, and that is the beginning reader's initial task is to learn how the spoken language they know, that they're very familiar with, relates to the written code that they're learning. So spoken words need to be treated as consisting of component parts, syllables and sounds, and we need to consider this as an ordinary teachable aspect of learning to read, otherwise known as phonological awareness. And if you've seen our other presentations, the next image will be highly familiar, and that is a learner is developing their language, and as they're developing their language, they're also, in order to become literate, developing their phonemic awareness, the ability to break up words into parts. So in this case, the word spoon is made up of 4 parts, 4 sounds. S, p, oo, n. And they start to go, actually, I'm starting to realize that there are distinct sounds within my language. And so I'm detecting the s sound and the p sound as opposed to the b sound or the d sound, the p sound. I'm 100% confident that that's the p sound, and so on. Now, this is where things get tricky in English. The s sound, now it's not always made by the letter S, but in this case, the rules don't allow for me to put another letter, like the letter C, in front of the P. So I can be safe that 73% of the time the letter S represents the sound S. Now even more regular, 96% of this time, the letter P, the single P, represents the P sound. And that N sound is 97% of the time represented by the single N, N. But where it gets tricky is the double O, the oon, as in spoon, is only represented by the double O 38% of the time. And what we'll find is that there's certain vowel forms, vowel sounds, that experience a wide variation of spelling options or orthography. And that's something that the learner needs to learn over time. And that's their phonemic knowledge leading into their phonics knowledge until they put all together and they automatically and rapidly recognize high frequency familiar vocabulary. So as I implied before, the beginning of this activity, the crux of this activity, is that children have strong phonemic awareness. They can listen, they can detect rhyme, they can isolate words and sentences, they're aware of syllables, they can detect initial and final sounds, they can isolate each individual phoneme within a word, and they can start to match those phonemes that they know with letters, and they begin to spell. Now, if you're looking for a great activity book that has very practical ways to build up that phonemic awareness, something I'd recommend is Adams, Borman's, Lundberg, and Beeler's text, Phonemic Awareness in Young Children, a Classroom Curriculum. Now keep in mind, the slides that I'm showing you here, they're available in the description if you're watching this on YouTube, or if you're watching this on the Literacy Bug, they're available in the blog entry that this video has been embedded in. So don't feel that you need to quickly write things down as you go, because you can download each of these slides over time. So if we take it from there, the workflow that I demonstrated just previously for you can be shown with this other word, helicopter. It's a big word, but it's a word that a child might be familiar with. And a child will need to be able to listen to a word in the context of a sentence, such as the helicopter flew over the house, and isolate, oh, what was the second word? What's the sentence about? It's about a helicopter. Let's clap out the word helicopter. Helicopter. Oh, there's 4 syllables. Helicopter. And so on, as I demonstrated with rabbit. And this takes us through the level of phonemic awareness to phonemic knowledge. Now, for young children, it mightn't just be enough to isolate and focus upon the word and clapping syllables and being able to isolate syllables, and maybe understand the beginning sound and the last sound of a word. But as children grow older, we're expecting more and more what we call full phoning segmentation ability. And then students learn that correlation between the sounds that they know and the letters that they know, blending those together and then returning to meaning, saying, okay, now that I just know helicopter, I don't just know that that's a helicopter, but I know features of helicopter, that it has rotating blades, that it hovers, that it's used to watch traffic in urban areas, that it's a form of aircraft, it can be a rescue vehicle, etc. And so this is also part of the Analyzing Spoken Words, is to return to meaning and ask questions about and build up knowledge and depth of knowledge about the words that we're investigating. And one thing I shouldn't forget is, if you're looking for a really good source of word pictures or pictures of common vocabulary, if you go to Text Project, I think .org, they have something called word pictures. So if you search even in Google for Text Project, word pictures, they'll have word pictures for animals, for human body, for vehicles, etc. And they're great as free, accessible, royalty-free resources that you can use in an activity like this, where you're building off of the learner's oral language and using their analytical skills to start to get their head around the sound principles in their language, and to match that with those letter combinations that they're just learning. So if we go back to the bigger picture, as Adam tells us, to develop the reading system, on one hand we need to have meaning and lexicon, meaning vocabulary, and that's why we start with the pictures. This is the lexicon, this is what the children know they've developed. A vocabulary of animals, a vocabulary of fruit, a vocabulary of vehicles, a vocabulary of body parts. And those become rich to use. To say, well, we use something that you know and that you care about, that's very concrete, and start analyzing it using that phonological processor. phonological means sound processor, to build up that phonemic awareness so that when we start to introduce letters, it's like, okay, these are words that I know, and I know how these words are broken up, and I'm starting to learn how I can represent those in print. And then I'm realizing that it's not so mysterious, that there's a logic to it. And that's something that is learnable. Now, a key feature or concept in that is the concept of invented spelling. So, before children attain a conventional level of spelling, which means being able to look up a word in the dictionary, or being able to spell a word correctly for the first time, they need to use everything they know about this phonemic awareness, phonology, and letter knowledge to invent spellings, novel forms of spellings. And so their invented spellings provide a really great window into their knowledge of the alphabetic principle. So if I bring up another example, the example of fruit. The children know the word fruit. It's part of their vocabulary, it's part of their concept. And then with phonemic awareness, they can break that word down into f, t. Great. That's fantastic. But they can easily spell that word double O-T. Now, phonetically, that's not wrong. And it reveals that the learner is developing a strong understanding of the alphabetic principle. But it's not conventional. And so what's important from a developmental perspective, is that children first need to spell words like it sounds to them. So between 4 to 7 years old, the spelling words how they sound. And then they're starting to, through lots of experience and stimulus, recognize that there's certain stable patterns that they can expect and rely upon. But then even those patterns aren't foolproof. So then they learn sets of rules, like the rules I mentioned with rabbits, is that I use the double B if the vowel in front of that consonant is the short vowel. So in rabbits, it's R-A-B-B-I-T-S, whereas in baby, it's B-A single B-Y, because the A in that word is its long form, or it says its name, baby. So there's those rules that we learn that help us understand why something is spelt a particular way, and it helps us deliberate between what it could be spelt like and what it actually is spelt like. Ultimately, with strong and many years of experience, things just look right. We spell it from knowledge. We're not sort of deep, problem solving it, but we're retrieving it, and we're using many different strategies to isolate and make sure that something is right, whether we're reading or whether we're spelling it. We're tapping into knowledge more so than anything else. Okay, so what are the steps of this activity? As you saw me do before, we review a picture. So in this case, like I could put a picture of a horse. I segment that word into syllables. So horse is just one syllable. Horse. Let's say it slowly. Horse. What's the first sound? What's the last sound? S. So, or s. And we'll demonstrate this in a second. And then match each sound with a phoneme tile. Match each phoneme tile with a letter. We can confirm a word by checking its conventional spelling, explore its meaning, etc. and then repeat for every word that you might be practicing with a student. And keep in mind that this sounds like a very table-type explicit activity that you do with a learner, but this can also be done in a sandpit or anywhere. Exploring a word and clapping out its syllables and what's its first sound. It can be an explicit activity like you could do with what I did with rabbits, or it could be incorporated into the type of questions, the type of analysis, type of things we ask learners to do when they're exploring rich vocabulary in their environment. But in that explicit sort of environment, the equipment that I used was I had a set of pictures. I have a set of pictures. I have those whole word sound waves, I have the syllable sound waves, I have, quote, popsicle sticks, I have the smaller phoneme tiles, phoneme sound waves, and then the phoneme tiles. And I'll show you in a second, all of these resources that are in this equipment are available for download in the description of the YouTube video, but also on the literacy bug, as well as letter tiles, space to write, colored tokens, etc. And that's just a list of what I just mentioned before. Pictures, the whole word sound waves, the syllable sound waves, the phoneme sound waves, the tiles, the letter tiles, those tokens, space to write words, and print words. Now, in relation to selecting pictures, there's a few things I want to bear in mind. The pictures that I showed before were all animals, so that's category 1. Semantically related words, so animals or fruits or feelings. But you can also choose pictures that all share a bit of a sound pattern, like hat and mat and sat and cat, if you want to focus attention upon certain sound patterns. Or they could be words from a source. Maybe there's a picture book that's what they're exploring, and you take little images from that picture book, and so that's what's gluing all the activity together, is those related items. You could, in starting the activity, you can start with the picture and have the child say the word, or you can say the word and the child has to select the picture that matches the word that you've just said. Or for advanced learners, you don't have pictures at all, and you say an unknown word. And when I say advanced learners, that's an older learner. You say, okay, let's focus upon the word diatribe. How would you spell diatribe? You don't have a picture, it's not familiar to the learner, and they have to use those problem-solving skills to say, well, okay, let's break it up into syllables, break it up into sounds. This is what I logically think the word would be spelled like. And that's more of an extension activity than an early years activity. Okay. So as I said, those are the steps. So let's go through the steps once more with another word. But this time, I'll do the last two activities, which is focusing on meaning as well as on sentences. Okay, so here's the demo. And let's do horse. Okay. Picture my horse. I'll pull up my full sound wave and I say, okay, so what's this a picture of? Oh, it's a picture of horse, or maybe horses. Horses. How many syllables in horses? Horses. Horse. Horses. What should we do? Should we do single syllable? Horse. Maybe we should just do a single syllable for the start off. We're just going to spell and work out horse. So that's just one syllable. So I don't need the popsicle stick. I can pull out here. It's one syllable. Horse. So how many sounds in the word horse? This might be challenging, so I might even skip that stage for a second. I might say, what's the first sound in horse? Okay, the sound. What's the last sound in horse? Horse. Horse. The sound. Sound. Okay, so what's in the middle of that? Or. Okay, so what's that sound? So here we go. Horse. What letter makes the H sound, the H. Now I'll show you again later on in a resource that the sound is almost always made by the letter H, even though the letter H is part of many other words. And if you can see here, I don't know if you can see it closely, I have a number. And the number correlates to how many sounds does this letter make? And I have one sound, it makes the H sound. But I put a little bit of an asterisk there because the H is part of a lot of other graphemes, like GH, PH, etc. And up here, the H sound is made by two things, H and WH. And so, and then four different things makes the OR sound, the OR. So ORE makes the OR sound, OAR makes the OR sound, but in this case we're looking for just OR. And the S sound, I could put just the letter S, but you know that you and I both would know that looks a little odd. In an invented spelling, I could say, well, that's how I would spell the word. But in this case, we have that silent E on the end of the word. And that's horse. So horse, horse. Let me say, let's write that one out. Horse. And my colored tiles, what do we know about a horse? They can run fast. They can find them on a farm. They are very strong. I can say that they're a mammal, and so on. And I'm using these colored tokens because then I could review and say, what did we say about them? They run very fast. You find them in farms. They're very strong, and they're a mammal, and so on. And then I can, if I use this, okay, let's write a sentence. The horse ran, or the horse galloped in the paddock. And if I fast forward, or not even fast forward, show another resource. This is an area where something like the sentence cycle comes into it. Let me go bring this back up. And you might not see this in full, but the first little triangle is, what is this about? Well, it's about a horse. What is it doing? It's galloping. Where is it galloping? In the paddock. When? In the morning. Why? To get some exercise. So the horse was galloping in the paddock in the morning to get some exercise. We use that sentence cycle to encourage the learner, after doing the analysis, to write a really rich and juicy sentence using that word that they've broken down. And then you can later on review the words that have been covered. Okay, so now what? So let's say we're then reflecting upon what the learner's done. What was the word? Did they independently listen? Yes, they did that. Did they divide the word into syllables? With some guidance. Did they divide it into a number of sounds? No, they jointly did that. Did they isolate the beginning sound? Yes, with guidance. The end sound? Yes, with some guidance. Did they match sounds to phonemes? No, but I modeled it for them. And I modeled out the full phoneme segmentation. Did we apply letters? No, the learner was too young, so we didn't do that. So we didn't construct the word, and we didn't check it against conventional spelling. So basically saying you don't have to do every step with all learners. But I did model out brainstorming, meaning, and we did jointly write write or talk or say a really good, rich sentence using that word. And so we want to integrate that activity, on one hand, we could be a standalone activity, but analyzing spoken words can be integrated into many parts of the learning experiences of developing children. It shouldn't be seen simply as an intentional teaching activity, as it looks like here. So just imagine those informal learning moments when a juicy word can be open to inspection and play, whether this occurs within the context of book reading or through play in the sound pit. So I'm always happy to field questions on that notion of integrated practice. Okay, so what's the point? So spoken words, as we said before, need to be treated as consisting of component parts. We now consider this an ordinary teachable aspect of learning to read, called phonological awareness. And bringing print and speech into alignment makes reading and writing feasible. So analyzing own speech is a key first step. And even though older learners will be automatically recognizing familiar vocabulary by sight, research does tell us that strong phonological decoding skills are really necessary to develop that automatic reading skill in the long term. So children who went on to improve in their reading abilities had sufficiently strong relationship between the orthographic or the written word forms and the relationships to sound. So even though there's that transition to fluency and automatic recognition, you can't skip the step of sounding out words and understanding the logic of the alphabetic principle. Now, there's a few key points that I'd like to make. Now, this activity does not explicitly teach the 44 or so phonemes in the English language in a systematic way, though a learner can become really aware of those sounds within their language through this activity. And you, as a teacher, can also do something like I'll lead you through this resource in a second. Maybe even a star chart. And in the additional resources, which I'll take you through in a second, a star chart in which you say, okay, what are the sounds in English, and which ones do I know? And which ones have we covered, and which ones have appeared in the words that we've been doing together in class? Whether you use this, I'd probably not use this with younger children, but as a teacher, you can say, oh, we've covered, they know the b sound, they know the y sound, and so on and so on, to reflect upon what's been covered in their oral vocabulary development, and what's been further developed in that analyzing spoken words type of task. Similarly, this activity doesn't teach all the common phoneme letter combinations. Again, learners can become familiar and apply their phoneme letter combination or their letter knowledge. But there are many other activities, and we'll talk about them in other presentations, that build up that understanding of sound phonic patterns in a more systematic manner. Keeping in mind, and this is what's really important, is this is an encoding activity. So it doesn't teach children how to read print words in isolation, but what it does is they can get an understanding of how their known vocabulary can be written. And then in other activities, we'll talk about how children build up their ability to read more and more complex words from sight. I shouldn't say from sight, but more and more complex words as a decoding activity. But just keeping in mind, this is an encoding activity. Okay, so without further ado, I'll take you through some of the related resources that are part of, also available for download from the YouTube description, or also on Literacy Bug website. So there's one file called Teaching Resources. So let me just take you through that quickly. So in that Teaching Resources, so activity has a table of contents. Might not be able to see the whole page there. Has a little bit of an introduction that takes some of the slides, the really key slides, from the presentation that I've just shown you, and walks through those and so on. It has all the equipment, so all the printouts, so you can print out your sound waves, your syllable sound waves, popsicle sticks, smaller sound waves, your phoneme tiles, vowels and consonants, and then your letter tiles, consonants and vowels, as well as plenty of blank tiles, because you might need multiple, so any letter. Has those word images, and I do put at the bottom of the page the link to the word pictures on the text project website, so you can go straight there and see all the images that are organized into key categories. So you don't have to do any extra work. Simply color tokens, the blank spaces to write. Also some slides on the recording activity, so as I went through that, what has been done independently with guidance, etc. So a helicopter, but also a blank form, but also a table that you can track multiple words as well. Nothing too exciting there. Keeping a journal, some pages there. And then if anybody's looked through our planning and monitoring for students, there's some scaffolds on just lesson planning, lesson reflection sheets, etc. So further additional resources, as mentioned before, a recommended book, phonemic awareness slide, that phoneme map of all the possible phonemes in English, and it has further information on how those are represented. Now, I'll fast forward. Another resource that will be available for download is these cards that you can see here, but in full size, so that you can read closely. So this is the letter, the B sound, and the percentage of time that is represented by that letter, and the different spellings of that word, as well as the ch sound and the different ways that the ch sound is spelled, etc. So that resource will have them almost like playing cards for each of the phonemes, and a bit of information upon those phonemes, etc., and vowel phonemes as well. Put that away. And a map of phonemes. Very difficult to read, and I find it a useful resource, but at the top are all the phonemes, the sounds within English, and the different ways that those phonemes can be spelled. Now, I do also have in the description that's accessible is that same resource, but rather than in a one-page table. Which I'm going to show you on each page. You'll say that's the letter B, the B sound. Letter B represents that sound 97% of the time. What are the other letters that represent it, and so on. I'll come back to that resource in a second, so I won't cover that one right now. And this is just a table that represents those percentages. And I represent those percentages because basically what a child's doing is they're learning those sound letter combinations. They're realizing that there's certain sound letter combinations that are more reliable than others. And so in many cases the consonants are those that tend to be more reliable than the vowel sounds. But we'll talk about how something like the short A vowel sound, as in a, as in cat, is 96% of the time represented by the single A. So a child can come to become more, I guess, rely more upon the stability of that relationship as opposed to other relationships. And this is the grapheme map. And like with that phoneme map, I do have a resource that those cards, which are barely legible on the map, are in full view in the Grapheme Cards resource that can be, again, downloaded from the description, but also downloaded from the blog entry or the main presentation. I've just there will be a page which will have the links on how to access each of these PDFs. But those sound cards are quite useful, or those letter cards or grapheme cards are quite useful. And then just other resources. So fit examples of semantic maps, feature analysis, as well as the last page. I think I've dropped it. Last page is that sentence cycle that we used with developing that sentence for horse. So that is part of the additional teaching resources pack that you can download from the video and from the Literacy Bug. Also, on the Literacy Bug, also for download is just a 2-pager that describes the activity and introduction, the equipment, the steps, and some of the assumptions and other things that we really look for in that activity. So this is more of your cheat sheet resource that can be very helpful. Now, before I finish up, I said I would go through this last resource, and that is this sound letter correspondences resource. But I think it's pretty self-explanatory. If I go through it quickly, it has a bit of an introduction, has that workflow that you did see previously, has those probability sort of patterns, but then it just goes through each of the sounds and how it's represented by different sort of letter combinations, etc. And so you can almost imagine this as something that a child can problem solve. I hear the B sound. How might it be spelled? I hear the ch sound. How might it be spelled? And so on. And the like. And the one thing I actually will point out with this resource that can be quite valuable is it does have an example right here of spelling rules that a learner would have to go, I see the letter C, but it's in front of an E or an I, so that means it's making the S sound as opposed to the K sound. And so that is really quite useful and valuable when getting to what are those rules that a learner has to develop when they're a bit older, 9 years old, 10 years old, etc., that helps them distinguish between what it possibly could be spelt like and what it most logically or by the rules of English orthography should be spelled like. Okay. So without further ado, the crux of the activity is always in this diagram. I'm hearing words and sentences. I'm isolating that word. I'm breaking it into syllables. I'm breaking it into sounds. I'm applying my knowledge of sound letter combinations to have a go at spelling it. And then recognizing that word as not just a combination of letters, but something meaningful and something that I have knowledge about. And then putting that into sentences. Okay. So, as a first presentation, probably a bit lengthy, but there's a lot of very practical goals that you can achieve by just having a stack of pictures of known vocabulary and using that stack of pictures to explore the logic of our words and how the logic of our words relates to the logic of print. Okay, so without further ado, thank you for listening, and please enjoy and explore. Go to the Literacy Bug online. Feel free to drop us an email with questions or requests. Visit us on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter.